the number of drug overdoses in the United States actually went down in 2018. And that's good news, but the cartels are doing everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen again. We're going to talk about it on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hi folks, Chuck Holton here. Thanks for being a part of the Hot Zone. We've got some cool things to bring you today about the war on drugs in the United States. That's kind of gotten a bad rap lately, but in reality, the DEA and the government is doing a great job, a much better job at cracking down on illegal narcotics. And what that's led to, according to a recent study, is an actual increase in the life expectancy here in the United States. It's been going down for 4 or 5 years, but the latest figures out of 2018 show that there was a slight uptick in the life expectancy, and part of that is due to better enforcement efforts against drugs and lower drug overdoses. But there's still a lot of drug overdoses in the United States. Take a listen to Robert Anderson from the CDC talking about the new study.
I think it's important to point out that overdose death still remains extraordinarily high in the U.S. and has increased exponentially in the past 2 decades. So even though this is the first year where we've had a decline, I think it's important to point out that we're not done with an overdose crisis in the United States. It's still really important to put all of our public health efforts into reducing the burden of overdose.
Drug overdose deaths declined slightly from 2017 to 2018 by 4.6%. That's the first decline that we've seen in the number of drug overdose deaths in 28 years.
So as he said, the number of overdoses has gone down, but it's still unbelievably high in the United States. And, that's kind of interesting to me because that stuff doesn't happen in countries that are terrible. I mean, you would think if anybody would be, ready to overdose on drugs and just escape and maybe even end it all, it would be people in Syria or people in Haiti or people in Sudan or Somalia. But in reality, those places have like the lowest suicide rate and the lowest rate of drug addiction of just about any place on the planet. And the more wealthy a country gets, the bigger the problem becomes with methamphetamines, with other narcotics and prescription drugs and things like that, and overdoses as well. And the United States, as we all know, has a major problem with drug overdoses. But under the Trump administration, they've been doing a lot to try to crack down on the flow of drugs coming in from Latin America. And actually, Costa Rica just made a gigantic drug bust of more than 5 tons of cocaine. That's $150 million of street value of cocaine that was picked up. And somebody's head's going to roll in Costa Rica. Unfortunately, the only guy they arrested in connection with that was the guy who drove it to the airport. But hopefully they'll be able to track down who's making the stuff and who's transporting it. We all know that Latin America is a major transportation, transshipment highway, superhighway, coming up through Panama, up into Latin America and Central America, through Mexico and into the United States. That's one reason why a wall is going to make it just that much more difficult to move these drugs into the United States. I want to go back and play for you just a little package that I made with some ranchers in Arizona talking about the threat, not only from drugs and human trafficking across their land from Mexico, but the problem with one other thing, and that's the U.S. food supply. Check it out.
Well, we experienced a lot of sickness in our cattle from all these groups coming through, running cattle off of water, sending the cow one way and the calf the other way, come back a couple hours later and get run off again by all these people coming through. And they were breaking out into pasteurella pneumonia, which is a stress-induced disease that if not caught within 24 to 48 hours, they're dead. And the traffic was so bad in that area that we finally had to pull all of our cattle out of there, so we didn't suffer any more losses.
So federal authorities with the Drug Enforcement Administration made a massive bust of methamphetamines in Atlanta the other day. As you know, meth is one of the most addictive, most destructive, most dangerous drugs that's flooding the United States. And if you didn't know, much of those drugs are no longer made in the U.S. It used to be you'd have some tweaker in his mom's trailer house someplace mixing this stuff up. Well, that doesn't happen near as much anymore because those guys have been put out of business, not by the federal authorities, but by the Mexican cartels. The cartels are able to make meth so much cheaper because they make it at industrial scale and they ship it across our border into the United States. Well, the Drug Enforcement Administration agents in Atlanta, they're starting a new crackdown against drugs and methamphetamine, specifically crystal meth. And they made a huge bust in Atlanta of over 2.3 million doses of meth just recently. So listen to what some of the DEA agents and the DEA administrator has to say about that new operation.
We're here today to announce Operation Crystal Shield, a drug law enforcement initiative that will attack the growing methamphetamine threat in the United States and the global criminal organizations responsible for flooding our communities and neighborhoods with this deadly drug. Operation Crystal Shield will focus enforcement efforts on 8 meth distribution hubs, 1 here in Atlanta and the other 7 throughout the United States: Los Angeles, Phoenix, El Paso, Dallas, Houston, St. Louis, and New Orleans. The Methamphetamine Epidemic Act of 2005 largely eliminated the production of meth in the United States. As a result, virtually all of the meth trafficked into the United States is now produced on an industrial scale in Mexico by Mexican drug trafficking organizations who smuggle their inexpensive, high-purity methamphetamine across the southwest border to Atlanta, as well as the other hub cities for distribution throughout our country.
When police got in Sound, they found an active meth lab. And what was in there were boxes of these candles. Looked like perfectly commercial candles that you would buy. They had inspection stickers that indicating they were inspected when they crossed across the Mexican border into the U.S. from CBP. And were not detected at the fact that they're actually methamphetamine. We went in, we found an active lab. We had no idea what we were about to encounter. And as you can see, this is, there was about 1,300 pounds of finished meth right here. And then there was at least another 100 gallons of meth in process as an active cook, or we would refer to it as in the lab. This represents on this table about 2.3 million individual doses. So right here, we have the ability to get 2.3 million individuals high for about 12 hours a day. I've been in this business a long time. This is a huge seizure domestically in the interior United States that we do not see at one time in one location. This is a staggering amount of methamphetamine.
So more than 5 tons of cocaine off the streets, more than 2.3 million doses of meth off the streets. Sounds like the drug dealers are having a bad day. And one of the reasons they're having a bad day is because we're building that wall on the southern border, but we're also deploying U.S. troops down there still. There are still National Guardsmen deployed along the U.S. southern border, and I want you to hear from one of them right now.
10-4, that sounds a lot like a person that we just had outside the perimeter of us. We're over at Bowers, over. My name is Corporal Thomas LaRue. I am a 19 Delta, which is a cavalry scout in the United States Army, Georgia National Guard, with Bravo Troop, 108th Cavalry, out of Canton, Georgia. Give me that pen back right quick. We got this here. I'm attached to Task Force Volunteer, Alpha Company, 2nd Platoon, which our nickname is the Border Wolves. So I'm a truck commander, which means that for my team, which means that I'm in charge of whatever particular site we're at that day. And then my driver is also in control of our MSC, or mobile surveillance camera. I am here to observe, detect, report, and deter. I'm on the river here. I'm observing anything that's coming across or activity that is worth reporting. I'm here to detect traffic of illegal activity, primarily narcotics, in this region. This region is number one in narcotics flow into the United States. It is my job, once I've detected that, I'm going to report it up to the Border Patrol, call them up on the radio so that they can stage in a way that they can apprehend any perpetrators of illegal activity. And the main objective here is being to deter illegal activity between Mexico and America.
He was acting kind of suspicious, looking back at us, and kind of seemed skittish. And he just edged our perimeter right outside where we'd be able to tell.
This particular mission, it's a reconnaissance mission, which is really cool because I get to do what the Army trained me to do. I got to do so many different things when I was in Afghanistan, but here my job is reconnaissance, which is neat, that I'm doing specifically what I was trained to do. What I spent so much time learning how to do and perfecting that craft. The other thing that's great about this mission is that I'm having a direct impact that I can see on the safety of America.
Observe the same dude down here with the binos through that open clearing right there.
When I have a raft full of drugs crossing into America and I get to be a part of stopping that, capturing those drugs and not letting them get into the streets, I can see a visible impact of me making America a safer place directly from my actions right in front of me. And that is an experience that I wouldn't trade.
All right, folks, that's all I've got for the podcast today. Thanks for watching The Hot Zone. We got a lot more coming up later on this week and in the future, so stay tuned and make sure you share it with your friends. Thanks for watching. I'm Chuck Holton.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.